Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Leanne Fullahan. I am with the People's Forum. I'm going to just check that we're okay on the live. So just give me 1 second. Yeah. Okay. Wonderful. All right. Well, welcome, everybody. Welcome to everyone who is here in person in New York City, all of our students who are on Zoom, and everyone who's watching us from all around the world on YouTube. We are thrilled to have our first session of our new series, Science Against Capitalism, the role of the biophysical sciences in building a sustainable future for all. I'm going to spare a lengthy introduction because we have a lot to get to, but I want to just say a couple of things about the spirit of this series, which we've built in coordination and collaboration with our dear comrade Salvatore Engel Di Mauro and the organizations that he is playing a leading role in, Eco-Socialist Horizons and Capitalism, Nature, Socialism. And we also have the very generous sponsorship of Science for the People. We started this series because we all know it, we live it, we see it. We know we're living through a period of crisis in dimensions that is hard to put into words. And we're kind of tired of just ranting about what's wrong with the world because we actually do have solutions. We have the solutions, they are available to us. The things that stop us from that is capital and imperialism. So the orientation for this series is that we want to start thinking about how can we actually start building a world where crisis is overcome and we're actually building a future where people can thrive and live to their fullest potential all around the world. So it's a big task, but we're going to start doing it step by step. We have every month a guest coming with us, a person in a biophysical science field to talk to us in detail about a particular approach to a problem, some of the possible solutions we might have, and some of the challenges that we face as we build towards it. We also have a study group that is meeting also once a month alongside this series. If you're not part of it and you're interested, you can ask me or anyone else at the People's Forum to get signed up. It's a great space if you want to do some reading and collective discussion with others, if you want to meet people who are asking similar questions. You don't have to be a scientist in it. You also don't, it's open to everyone, and it's actually a really great group. There's science teachers in high schools. There's people working in laboratories. There's people studying the history of science. There's people working in programming. There's people working on community health, all coming together to kind of debate and discuss these questions. So it's a really great space if you're interested in joining us. So I will stop there for now. I want to pass it over to dear comrade Salvatore to get us started for this conversation. Briefly, what we're looking at today is we'll start with a conversation and from our guest, Rob Wallace, and then we'll have time for questions, both from the internet, people joining us via the internet and people in the room. And then we'll break. For those who are in the room, we'll have a collective exercise to go through together at the end. So please stay. Great. So Salvatore, please, I pass it to you. And thank you so much for hosting this conversation.
Thanks very much, Leanne. I hope everybody can hear me. Is that working? Not sure whether the mic is positioned in the most strategic way to get my voice across, but thank you very much for joining us. And just to echo Leanne, I mean, the purpose here in the longer term is to build from the forces that we already have to devise alternatives, because when hopefully soon enough, when things will be really changed, we will need, I think, everybody who has technical skills to be on the correct side, to say the least. And so in that spirit as well, this series of seminars is being organized, and I can't thank the People's Forum enough for hosting us, for all the infrastructure and logistics that they take care of. And it's quite an honor for me to be here, and also to be able to introduce Rob Wallace eventually. Just a few things that I wanted to share with you. Eco-Socialist Horizons is a very, very small organization, but if anyone is interested in knowing more, please don't hesitate to ask me. Capitalism, Nature, Socialism is regrettably an academic journal, but it's not just for academic purposes, to say the least. And if you find anything in that journal that you find would be of interest and you can't access it, I will be more than happy to share, a PDF of whatever article you need. I will have my email information available for those of you who would like that kind of resource. There are certain, hopefully, even in the shorter term, certain activities that I hope at least some of you will be interested or will have the wherewithal to be able to carry out at some point. One of them is whatever you get out of this program, you will be able to share widely amongst your networks, and especially with people in the biophysical sciences. Of course, on this occasion, especially if you know anyone in epidemiology or public health, it would be great to spread the word to them about not just this event, but what was discussed in this event. Why is it important to have a specifically socialist epidemiology and a socialist oriented or a socialist public health policy? The other thing is about recruitment. And again, like I was stating before, it would be very important to have everybody, as many people on board as possible to change this society towards socialism, and that will require people in the STEM fields. And so if you are within any of those scientific fields, without, of course, jeopardizing yourself, it'd be great if you would be able to recruit people to the side of socialist causes, and for whatever socialist formation that you might belong to, or maybe not, but at least you can get people acquainted with the movement that already exists. For example, Science for the People would be one way of having people in the biophysical sciences become acquainted with what already has been done, and for decades. In fact, you can go even back to the last century, even earlier than that. Another thing is perhaps some of you who are already in the biophysical sciences could perhaps consider try to combine socialist activism with the science that you are already doing. It's not easy. Sometimes it requires a bit of creative effort, but you're not alone in this. And so please rely on someone like me or Rob Wallace. I do stuff in environmental science, soils in particular. You shouldn't be alone confronting, that effort. And lastly, if you can organize events like this one, would be even better, and then report to the rest of us. So if you're interested in doing that, please do get in touch. It'd be fantastic for this to be multiplied in as many places as possible. So with that said, let me introduce today's speaker, seminar holder, Rob Wallace. I'm not sure how many of you already know of his work. He's a co-founder of the Agroecology and Rural Economics Research Corps and the Pandemic Research for the People. He also is involved in a People's CDC that I highly encourage you to watch on YouTube. He's the author of Big Farms Make Big Flu and Dead Epidemiologists, one of his recent books. He's also co-author of Neoliberal Ebola and another co-authored book, Clear Cutting Disease Control. He's consulted for the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations and, of course, the People's CDC, where he's featured prominently, of course. He's one of the main forces. So, Rob Wallace, it is an honor to introduce you and to be next to you, finally, after all these years of knowing, collaborating one way or another in person, finally.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate the introduction. I appreciate that. And thank you very much, everybody, for coming out today. I very much appreciate it. I'm a native New Yorker, so it's nice to be back in town and seeing the hustle and bustle of a wonderful city. And today's talk, it's going to be a combination of slides. I got some whiteboard action to go on here. I got some lecture text to share, but also there'll be some more informal conversation as well. And as was brought up, at some point, we'll switch into fielding your questions and then moving into more of a workshop. So I do like to talk. So if at some point I'm counting on the people organizing this to shut me up when I go into overtime. So we want to make sure that we do get to everything in a reasonable amount of time. So I wanted to start off, well, here's a couple things going on. The organizers have some questions that they wanted me to address, and Salvatore will offer them, and they're very hard questions in a good way. And so I have a lot to say about it. I had to draw from all these various kind of talks I've given. So this is why, in part, it speaks to the kind of mixed media here. But I wanted to start off with a kind of introduction about the state of things. Let's start off, but we're largely in a social system organized around the hum of mass death. But it's truly an extraordinary ideological judo here going on, that the deaths of more than 1 million Americans, and by measures of excess deaths, more than 15 million people around the world, is being presented as some sort of triumph. The pandemic is over, President Biden declared, as 10,000 confirmed deaths or more a week continue to churn on, even before or just as we're entering the likely winter spike. Now, if only he could sweep away climate change with another such pronouncement. Europe and elsewhere, more quietly, just stopped masking and other non-pharmaceutical interventions starting this summer. Now, the pronouncements on high were supported by science down low. And I'm not talking about science that we're talking, that we expect, but something more along the lines of a kind of nationalist alchemy. So under Henry VIII, the English set up a whole church so that their king could remarry. The Church of the Employer here in the United States offers a different expediency. So the first slide here, we have last year, within days of a short letter from the Delta Airlines CEO and the president of the Infectious Disease Society of America, who signed on as well as on a well-paid Delta retainer, basically asked this US CDC that they, against all the scientific evidence, move toward a direction that COVID patients would only have to quarantine for only 5 days before returning to work. The viral dynamics don't support that whatsoever. Earlier this year, next slide, please. Earlier this year, the CDC just coded out measures of community COVID transmission by replacing it with a more indulgent marker of what they're calling community levels, based on the lagging indicator of hospitalizations, which US hospitals, following the CDC and NIH lead, are no longer obligated to report in. But even reducing these case definitions of COVID to what they also did was they reduced the case definitions of COVID to whether the patient required a COVID-specific antiviral or monoclonal antibody. So even if you checked in with COVID, they don't necessarily register it unless you need that particular drug. So by even this forgiving measure, all 5 New York City boroughs are presently at the highest COVID community level. And yet local health officials haven't reinstituted masking mandates as the level suggests. Next slide. By the previous measure, kind of measure of community transmission, the whole of the state is either at substantial or high transmission. As commentator Lucky Tran put it, while the levels were used to rationalize not using masks when they were low, they are not used to rationalize putting masks on even under this flaw of a measure when it bounces back. The measure was used solely to disarm an already wobbly public health response and send everybody back to work. You see, there are some things more important than people's health and well-being, or at least that's the vantage of the political class. After suffering a year's surprise that commoditizing the last of the world's forests produces the epidemiological blowback experts of all political positions warned for decades, both business parties here and the neoliberal consensus the world over returned humanity to the factory floor, even to the tune of millions more killed by the virus or debilitated by long COVID. That China refused its tributary status and refused sending millions of its workers to such deaths, and some objectors helping bottling up corporate supply lines, so enraged the US that we are on the verge of war. Now that might seem an oversimplification of matters, and I suggest that it is not. This is much of the world is organized around centers of capital competing with each other, and the rest of the people are left to die as a consequence. Next slide. Now, I'm not going to go into COVID more than I have today, just in passing, and I will return next year because I have a book coming out here, The Fault in Our SARS, COVID-19 in the Biden Era, and that's a book cover there that looks like a Claritin box. Just pop this pill or vaccine or the magical thinking of 5 days quarantine that no Biden official who has been infected has followed, by the way. If you saw that the CDC director, Rochelle Walensky, I think took 18 days to return back to work. It's all good, that's good, but for the rest of the country, that would be nice as well. But if you follow these things, the pill, vaccine, the 5 days quarantine, all of your employer's problems will go away. Instead, in the face of the mega machine of it all, masked up for this serious work today by our own organizing, we are here to talk through the nature of a socialist epidemiology. What kind of science of disease control and prevention should be pursued? And we're going to take the first steps toward practicing such a science, although many of you may already be doing so in the course of your jobs or in your communities. We appreciate that there are people showing up here or online that have their own expertise. You know, we've all lived through a pandemic in the last couple of years, so we all learned a few things along the way. But some of you are maybe nurses, some of you may be already working in the natural sciences, some of you maybe in the course of your work have had to make some decisions about how best to traverse a situation in which you have largely been abandoned. So we are here to follow in the spirit of my brother in CUNY, that's the City University of New York. And he's the kind of organic leader, both always already there, but also emerging now at this critical juncture in world history. Kazembe Balogun asks us, what does it mean to be an intellectual who produces community instead of always producing content? So we're here today to practice that in the context of epidemiology. And to help us in this direction, I'm going to try to answer these 4 key questions that Salvatore and the organizers have asked of us. So do you want to offer the first question or?
Sure, Lobes. Okay. Thanks. Well, thank you very much for this brief overview of what's going on even locally. Just bring quite a bit of pause. So I feel like I'm trying to digest it all. Perhaps having a wider lens on this, like if you could give, there's something more mundane, perhaps, but for those of us interested in particular how epidemiology has been going as a field of study, if you can give an overview of that and what does it address and how can epidemiologists be of significance in terms of their work in the world these days?
Okay, I think I want to talk first about the nature of the natural sciences first. Mm. It's the thing that many of us in STEM often share. We share some commonalities, and Ostensibly, we're not about the paranormal, no ghosts, no gods, but materialist realities we can detect with our senses. And what we can detect, however, is still very much socially bounded. So I'm not ready for that yet, but what we can detect is still socially bounded, right? You know, it depends of the state of our technological development, for instance, you know, microscopes and PCR machines and telescopes and even mathematical equations allow us to see things we didn't see before, but they're specific to a historical moment, okay? It's not some sort of abstract necessity to it. And it's not that we knew nothing before modernity as well. Instead, the whole history of humanity has been an effort to transmit what we learned about the nature of things, however wrapped in fables, songs, and myths. So there we go, returning back to the stuff of ghosts and gods. But there was an aspect of trying to take what we've learned so far and transmit it to the next generation. But it does speak maybe perhaps to why, you know, this whole bedrock of thousands of years of learning things in the course of organizing ourselves into societies has since been either monetized or banished by the bourgeoisie. So sources of competition for them. They want you to streamline your line of thinking into their bag of presumptions. So, I mean, at one at the same time, we can reject theocracies and aristocracy and expect more than the Elon Musk of the world as our new lords and masters. Okay. I'm ready for this next slide here. So how do we get here? How do we get to this point? The philosopher Istvan Meszaros, he diagrammed the relationship shared across nature, capitalism, and science. So we have a basal triangle there. And then I gotta put my glasses on here. There on the upper left, we have H as humanity, N as in nature, and I down the bottom is our industry, our capacity to appropriate things from nature. So it's not about factory, right? Just us in doing what Engels said about labor, right? Labor in terms of our work, in terms of drawing the things necessary for us to survive. Okay, and you know, of course, over the course of human society or history, it was been spotty in that, you know, there were some moments in which civilizations collapsed, but they were on the basis of the particular failure of judgment in the course of this interaction. Next, can you click, please? Click again. So what we have here is wait, not yet, go back. So what we have here is, in essence, a second plane of interactions that have arrived, in which we are producing and privatizing the surplus value that we're in the business of generating as a society. It now gashes off out of that first basal relationship. And it's organized around capitalist dynamics first and foremost. So that is, nature and people are in essence projected off the earth proper into a distinct space where there's an alienated nature and a people that are alienated into labor and profit are interacting on commoditization's terms alone. So modern science, its own productions looped into profit or its upkeep. And it emerges out of helping the second plane here as a means of organizing colonial labor power and making newly discovered nature legible to capital accumulation. So you have the differences between basic and applied science, right? And so central to our notion of the modern disciplines. So in this context, it's largely differentiated by what end of the vector there. So we have, on the one hand, applied science might be, we see where the natural sciences point. Applied sciences may be looking at alienated industry. But what's really weird for a lot of people, and even practicing scientists, is the notion that basic science may not be looking at nature, N, but maybe looking at alienated nature. So our basic ideas about the nature of nature is really focused on an alienated nature that capitalism has produced. And the most common example is that of, I'm going to go to the Amazon and study nature there, without remembering that, of course, across history, there were indigenous groups for thousands of years, who in essence molded the forest to act as a food forest. And this isn't just in South America, it's in every continent that humans lived in. But more specifically, of course, we have a rapid acceleration in the way capitalism is changing that nature. And so you have a lot of biologists who go down to these places, say, I'm looking at nature, and they're not. They're looking at an alien nature that they can't weave into their analysis. So what ends up happening along the way is the things that we organize our way of thinking of things are divided from each other. So we have ethics, one part of this, political economy, and another part. And the sciences as a discipline, meanwhile, are decoupled from each of those things. And each is focusing upon a different point in the space, which is why natural scientists have such a difficult time integrating their work with notions of ethics and political economy beyond general appeals to, I'm helping humanity. Now, as a little sidebar here, this isn't just a nice diagram. Our group took these ideas and we ran a statistical test on things. What did we do? We, evolutionary biologist Kenichi Okamoto, geographer Alex Liebman, and I developed one of the first statistical tests for an agricultural metabolic rift, this rift between ecology and economy. And we looked at how industrial agriculture accelerated alienation across human, nature, and industry across 25 US states from 1970 to 2000, because those were the data we were able to get from the USDA in order to operationalize the three axes here. And we were able to test whether or not alienation across this space had anything to do with the emergence of a couple foodborne pathogens. I'm not going to go into the details today, but my point is, this isn't just high theory. Once you've kind of readjusted your sense of the nature of science as it relates to the nature of things, you can readjust the questions you ask, but in an entirely perfectly appropriate scientific practice. Right? Now, to go on, I made allusion to the fact that there's a history to all this, the science relationship with capitalism. Geographer Jason Moore, another world systems theorist, we learned from them that the Portuguese arrival upon Madeira's commodity frontier off Africa in 1419 onward was a particular scientific practice steeped in political economy, offering the means of organizing newly encountered labor power and decoding and then recoding the nature off-continent for capital accumulation. So the colonials came into these places, they saw people and land they didn't understand. The scientists sign up, we're going to help you figure this out. We're going to decode what's going on, and then we're going to readjust things to help you, in essence, do your export economy to the deaths of thousands of people. But now you got sugar in Italy now, right? But the thing is, it goes and that has repeatedly been the relationship from then on. So we have new sciences that have since regularly emerged to help set off and service each of capitalism's subsequent iterations: mercantilist, the slave trade, monopoly, the factory, multinational, finance, neoliberal, biotech, information, surveillance, and combinations thereof, all in turn attempting to trade off on science's gravitas. And it goes the other way around. So yes, many scientists, each of capitalism's many scientists, who was that? Many scientists aim to avoid undue bias. So there's something called Hume's guillotine or Moore's naturalist fallacy. You don't confuse what you wish for what is, right? Seems to be a good rule of thumb. It's a wise cautionary at the heart of much of the work we do in science. But such principles are also circumstantially false. So whereas new scientists are taught in the classroom the wonders of positivist empiricism, meaning I'm going to test hypotheses with data, in the lab, they're inculcated into the dark arts of conducting a line of research avoiding professionally difficult questions. How else, if I may be so unfair, to score the grant from Ecolab or NIH, or those junkets from Cargill and Hormel? The methods upon which answers can be well arrived on are somehow conflated the kinds of questions scientists are supposed to ask. But don't get it wrong. All that is science acting as a form of labor discipline. It doesn't say, the scientific methodology does not speak to the questions you get to ask. And so our group, even though we've been ranch scientists for decades, took great pleasure in taking Mazzaro's model here and running a statistically informed analysis of alienated agriculture in the US. Because we know that work's not being done at all. And it's nothing to do with whether or not it's a good question, or that whether or not the analysis is possible, or whether or not the statistics were okay. It had something to do with almost the entirety of agronomics basically being subsumed into the ways and means by which land-grant universities across the US are now basically agribusiness R&D, right? It has nothing to do with science other than as a form of discipline. Okay, you've been very patient because I was supposed to talk about epidemiology, and look where we went, right? But we had to go there in order to get to see where things are. I mean, if you have been paying attention the last couple of years about how a science can be so perverted by the necessities of empire and power, I think we were given a master class in that, right? So what is epidemiology? Is a study of the emergence, spread, demographics, and evolution of infectious and chronic diseases. And up until this past century, infectious diseases were the primary source of human mortality. But however, that has since changed. We have both HIV, which geographer Peter Gould called the slow plague, and then more expeditiously, COVID-19. Many people can be killed in short order, especially as public health is sold off or erased out of the neoliberal fictions. So that's on the receiving end of the new pandemics, right? That's the damage that accrues. And then on this slide here shows on the source end of things, where forests are commoditized, it could be by agriculture, mining, logging, anything else. We see that the rate of new zoonotic disease emergence picked up through the turn of the century across outbreaks, kinds of disease, host type, pathogen, taxonomy, and transmission mode, all with the neoliberal turn in agriculture worldwide. Now, those of us who have been train spotting diseases this century so far, we used to track new pathogens like this on the annual, and then they started emerging in parallel. So, SARS-2 emerged while a whole bunch of us were looking at African swine fever in hog in China. And, or we were looking at avian influenza that was circulating in Europe and doing quite a jobby. And, knocking out all the poultry. And this is likely to continue to happen. So we have, as the forests are smoothed out, as their biodiversity goes in decline, and we'll talk more about that in due course if there's time, and as the global travel and trade networks fully globalize, previously marginalized pathogens can go global in short order. So from the Congo to having cocktails on the Miami beach in a couple of weeks, right? So what I'm getting at here is unlikely that another 100 years will separate us from the next serious pandemic. So that's why epidemiology is so damn important right now. Want to go to the next question?
Certainly. And as a Marxist in particular, how do you approach epidemiology? What would be constitutive of a socialist epidemiology in particular? Now they've given this fantastic panoramic view about the history of science per se, and all that that went along with it through today. And then with that, if you can share with us an example of a route that you have found effective in combining Marxism with epidemiology in particular.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of lied. I said that I was not going to talk about COVID again, but it's impossible not to talk about it, particularly in this context, right? Because it's such a clear example. Some of you are in the class and you read some Richard Levins and Richard Lewontin, fantastic stuff. And they are part of a lineage that goes back, Salvatore brought out, of hundreds of years of radical epidemiology and ecology one of the things we do as students interested in the kind of socialist epidemiology is to recover that understanding and knowledge so that we can set up in a kind of Walter Benjaminian notion of setting up a history that in essence legitimizes a different turn, a different direction. So evolutionary biologist Richard Lewontin, among others, commented that scientists are part of society before they ever became scientists. So they are inoculated with its premises and conceptual instincts before they ever show up at school. Then there are the various filters up the chain of command in which scientists must demonstrate loyalty to the system that allows them to their work, from the neoliberal university to the state, which has a class character, to the corporation. So epidemiologists are always combining capitalist theory with power's needs for this current time. And we saw this in spades this year. Liberals went to war on Trump's deadly neglect, only to circle back supporting Biden's neglect. And here's a short excerpt from the new book. I write here, the liberal establishment threw in entirely with the Biden administration's return to normal. The Harvard School of Public Health, Randy Weingarten, and the American Federation of Teachers, and inviting arch-COVID minimizer Leanna Wen to speak at its annual conference, the American Public Health Association. And here I quote from the New York Times, who had interviewed a infectious disease scientist. Quote, what the CDC is, in my opinion, trying to do, they are trying to still be relevant. And maybe when they say something, people will listen to them instead of being completely 180 degrees away from what behavior is anyway. Peter Chin Hong, an infectious disease specialist at UCSF, said. Bill Hanage, an epidemiologist at the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health, agrees that the new guidance, and I'm continuing to quote the article, the new guidance shows that the CDC is trying to meet people where they are. Quote, I think that this is a point where you can actually have to sort of get real and start giving people tools they can use to do something or not, because otherwise people will not take you seriously, Hanage said. And I finish a comment on this by saying, as if the practice of public health was merely a popularity contest. And the refusal to pay people to stay home during the pandemic, never to be disputed, clearly now makes COVID a matter of personal choice. The government abandons you, and then now you're in a position to make a choice whether or not you want to expose yourself, but you also have your rent due, by the way, right? We got rid of the rent moratoriums and all the other things that allow people to stay home and avoid getting infected. So you can see my colleague Jose Haloy's point that science without conscience is just AI. A Marxist approach rolls in reverse. It doesn't aim to cut away or rationalize the state's impacts or obligations for so-called natural phenomena. It explicitly folds in societal impacts, just as we did with the agricultural alienation, right? Indeed, there's been a long history of socialist epidemiology, and John Bellamy Foster and colleagues published in the Monthly Review a great short history of the dialectical ecology of disease emergence, including everything from the classic Hippocratic texts, airs, waters, places, to Bernardino Ramazzini, Marx and Engels, Rudolf Virchow, E. Ray Lancaster, Florence Kelly, and I'll go through all the names there, but W.E.B. Du Bois, and so on, Salvador Allende, J.B.S. Haldane, on and on, right? So there's a long history of people who've done this work. You're not alone. If you're in your lab and you're thinking these thoughts and nobody agrees with you, you're not alone. There's a long history of this kind of work being done, not only in countries around the world, but even here in the United States. So there's a lot about science to criticize, especially as many in it are serving an empire on the end of its cycle of accumulation, rationing public health as a form of eugenist optimization. But we also shouldn't let the not unimportant work of science and technology critiques of science or the Foucauldian archaeologies get in the way of developing socialist natural sciences that serve the people. As leftists, we can, one and the same time, object to the greedy pharmaceutical industry efforts to medicalize social problems and still demand the latest in biomedical innovations, say COVID drugs or vaccines, be made available to all the world. We can do both those things at once. Our job is to help people get through capitalism while we also plan something post-capitalist. Both those things are part of your docket. Now, here's another example. Next slide, please. Here's an example in which we bring in the greater picture into things. And the example is called Governance is Key, and it's on a preprint server, but also it's going to be in the new book as well. And it's about that governance is key to keeping SARS-2 from evolving a vaccine-resistant genotype. So I'm just going to quickly through here. Basically, we ran a model over 170 days to determine whether or not, given the policies, the non-pharmaceutical policies that 4 territories had, you know, like mask mandates and all that, given these, what is the likelihood of a strain that would evolve that would be resistant to vaccines? We did this like a year ago. So this is even before all the issues, you know, the failure to do campaigns with, I mean, here's the thing, before I get to this, I want to say something quickly. You know how they say, hey, we don't need to do masking anymore, therefore because we have vaccines. Well, the vaccine campaign has collapsed. It's not going very well. Nobody's doing the boosters. The problem is that you need the non-pharmaceutical campaigns in place to help the pharmaceutical campaigns work. So if you have not just mask mandates, but things that the US government didn't even do, but other countries did, if you have community health workers go door to door, and develop relationships with people in the neighborhoods or out in the holler, out in from farm to farm, you develop trust. Some people will say, fuck you for the first couple of weeks and you don't show up again. But for the most part, you can build trust necessary so that in the course of getting to a point when we do have the fucking vaccine, we could probably get more people to take it. Those two things are fundamentally integrated with each other. So here are the 4 territories. We've got, now my geography is going to be tested here. I'm an American.
Panama, Costa Rica.
I know. Panama, Costa Rica, Oklahoma, just kidding, Texas, and Uruguay. Thank you. It would have been embarrassing if I didn't get that right.
Sorry.
But in any case, we modeled over, I think, 170 days, the likelihood that it would merge. So that's above that middle line across the middle there. These are under a different kind of infection rates, all the B's down at the bottom there. So, and what we see is that for the most part, and we know what each country is doing in terms of their non-pharmaceutical interventions, right? But our model goes that Texas, which is has both a combination of, at that time, then we got the data, they were doing vaccinations, although not as good as other states, but had enough vaccines going on and also letting the virus spread that allows the virus to experiment enough to evolve out from underneath the vaccine. So this is why we call it governance is key. If you want to keep such a strain from emerging, then you have to do the non-pharmaceutical stuff as well. So it's not just a mode of success toward getting people vaccinated in the first place, but it's the combination, the Swiss cheese model, where one layer may not have a couple holes in it and it may not do everything right. But then you have multiple layers there, multiple pieces of cheese in a way that all the holes are eventually covered by the other interventions. And so we're doing completely opposite, right? We ran away from all of that. And now we're in a state in which we have various Omicron subvariants and lineages are basically evolving out from not only our pharmaceutical interventions, the monoclonal antibodies and the vaccines, but also our natural immunity as well. And, you know, long COVID, although maybe people are not getting killed as much, although that's a good question if the hospitals are no longer reporting COVID data. But assuming they are, there is the damage of long COVID, which estimates put at as much as 24 to 35 million Americans have long COVID. And there are different versions of long COVID, right? There's now all of it's awful. I mean, if you've got chronic fatigue and that's it, it sucks. but you have all sorts of heart damage. You have 30% increases in heart attacks among young people 25 to 44. You have scarring of the heart. It's been documented. You have the suppression of the p53 gene, which leads to p53 is cancer suppressor gene, so at least for 6 months. So, I mean, are we going to see increases in cancer? That's the open question now. There's damage to the neurological system. There are the declines in blood flow to the brain. There's destruction of the microglia. I mean, we can go on and on, right? I mean, the reason why I can do that is because it attacks through the ACE2 receptor that is studied throughout our entire body. So there's discussion of the decline in the immune response makes it, although I'm hesitant to use it, I will use it. I was hesitant for a long time until a recent COVID this week when I said it. I said it's a kind of airborne AIDS in that direction if you are damaged. The immune system is in decline. It eats through the germinal centers. The diversity of your antibodies goes kaput. So that's what the bearer of bad news. I apologize, but this is like some real shit we got to talk about. Okay, I mean, so governance is key to dealing with all these things, because once you get into long COVID, the medical system that's not for most people is not able to handle this. There's been no direction from CDC on this. It's all let's pretend. Okay, I think I'm going to stop there in that question. So if you want to go to the next one.
It really.
How are we doing for time?
Oh, I don't know. Yeah, I think it's fine.
Oh, why don't we stop then? Or what are you feeling?
Okay, fantastic.
Okay.
Then maybe you combine
Okay.
the latter two questions. Certainly, just give an incredible overview, especially with the latest study of how you could combine even something that outwardly does not look particularly socialist, right? And so you're already showing how epidemiology can be used to reveal something about capitalism, what's wrong with capitalism. And so I guess you can use that example, I suspect, to as a field of investigation, to not only to study how capitalist relations create these conditions and intensify them, but then how do you build socialism through epidemiology as well? How does it help us build socialism? And then, of course, how does even one become a Marxist epidemiologist? What paths would you recommend, or what kind of signposts to avoid as well? And my apologies for my pedantic geography self. That's what you have. That's what you get when you have a geographer next to you. Sorry.
Yeah, that's fine.
Cheers.
These are great questions. I think I mean, it's all clear. I mean, the objective in terms of responding to COVID was that the political class was scared enough by something new that they, in essence, did what many socialists or non-socialist countries even had the perverse notion that governance is about helping your own people. I mean, so you crossed the world, you had very different governments from New Zealand to China to Vietnam to Iceland who said, oh, we should protect our people from a deadly virus. Now, the thing is, we can blame Trump. Yeah, total fuck up and a nightmare, right? Of course, but also an American archetype as well, right? So this is why when Biden returns to Trump policies, it's not merely a matter of political persona or even political party, right? It has to do with where we are in terms of this particular historical moment. And I can go on a lot, and I do a lot in the book, so we'll save that for another day. But I want to talk a little bit, give another example, because I'm giving you examples in which we took these ideas and did some analysis and did some science with this stuff. Okay, so I'm going to jump into another example because I want to get into what an alternate science might look like. And I'm going to use the whiteboard here. We need to move this a bit? And I am going to have equations, but they won't be on the test, I promise.
Oh yeah, you didn't realize.
No, I'm just kidding. So, and people get scared of equations, and I'm not much of a mathematician. My colleagues are much better at it and stuff, but it's good to, you can draw things out of it. And so I want to start off. We had a paper called Agribusiness versus Public Health.
Mm.
So already we're like, gauntlet down, we're ready to rumble. we do not see those things as being on the same side, and historically they're not. And we give examples. We cite work by a Dutch team that showed throughout Dutch history going back 100 years, the Dutch really depend on agriculture, and agribusiness routinely kick public health in the gonads again and again. And only when the outbreak accrued that suddenly public health agencies or the ministry was allowed some leeway. So we start off with the usual stuff. I'm gonna don't leave yet, please, because I want to get to some points here. It's an equal sign. Now, this is just D, if you remember, it's just a change in, right? So I is being, so we start off, I always try to teach my undergrads that it's about learning what the words mean and then reading out the sentence. So D is the change in, I is the number infected, T is time, B is I think the infection rate, I again infected, S is the number of susceptibles, and then the number infected again with the number that have recovered, and the number mu here, the number who have died. Mm. So we read the sentence. The change in number infected over time is based on the number who have already been infected, the rate in which they infect susceptibles, so producing new infecteds, minus those who've been infected who have died and those who have recovered. That's all it says. This is the typical typical way of doing this, and there are issues with it, right? There's it's very deterministic in the sense of the numbers. You don't just have one number for this. There might be a range, so that you can introduce what's called stochasticity, or little changes within a particular range for each of these variables. So the vital rates can have stochasticity. But what's missing here is that the environment itself can also be stochastic and change the relationships between the various actors here. So what you can do here, and it's not quite kosher, but you can add another term here, that is the stochasticity of the environment. So you might be in a forest that's been cleared by agribusiness. So all in a regular forest, or in a forest that hasn't been destroyed, there's so much complexity going on that it's much lesser likelihood of running into another individual of your species. So that's the complexity does the work of actually imposing a kind of buffer on the capacity of the virus to spread. If you clear that forest, then you reduce that environmental stochasticity, and it allows, it kills, deforestation destroys many species, but for some species, they do quite well in those circumstances. So in West Africa, you have bats who, when deforestation happened, they just didn't roll over and die. They actually were attracted to the new monoculture plantations. And what's not to like? You don't have any predators. You have a nice range space to be able to fly from your roosting site to your foraging site. And of course, you increase the interface between the bats and the humans who are working on the plantation. So you've cleared out the buffers there that allow the virus then to spill over into humans. So you look at the West Africa outbreak of 2013 to 2015, the virus itself didn't change that much at all in terms of its evolutionary genetics. It had to do with the increase in the interface and the changing. That's why we call it neoliberal Ebola, because of the structural adjustment programs And basically the arrival of the incursion into the forest leads to increased spillover. The people are kicked off their land in a way that forces them to go working in the local cities to find work, to pay bills. They do engage in cycle migration, meaning they do circle back to help with what little family plots they are able to get. So there's a straight line from the deepest forest, shotgun into the local capitals in West Africa, and then on a plane elsewhere. We had a couple cases in the US and Europe, but for the most part didn't happen. But of course, COVID-19, SARS-2 is it's a different story, right? So why do I bring this all up? Well, the point here is that this is not nature. It gets back to our story about how what we consider nature is actually very much a matter of human intervention. And so this thing is basically in part, not totally, but an aspect of human culture or political intervention. So, so against the notion that is very much prominent in ecology and evolutionary biology, this environmental noise is not a natural property of the forest or city. So we're against this kind of invisible hand model of disease emergence. And so instead, this is a outcome of policy and governance. So we treated the governments, agribusiness, and other groups setting these environments as organizations engaging in cognition. They're coming to decisions about what to do with the forest and how to respond to them or not respond to them, including dealing with whatever damage that might come about, including new pandemics. So we ended up doing additional modeling here to show within the kind of more economistic models about showing how short-term returns can lead to long-term epidemiological damage. Typically that's externalized onto local peoples, onto wildlife, onto local waterways, onto consumers. It's always someone else who ends up picking up the bill. Now we also model the ways and means that these efforts on the part of agribusiness can be disrupted. So we use some military theory to model strategies in asymmetric conflict by which a powerful entity like agribusiness could be defeated by a less powerful opposition like a health agency or smallholder farmers. The thing is, though, that opposition can stretch across a continuum of interventions within the bounds of civil society, perhaps, but also as violent conflict as well. So certainly agribusiness operates that way on their end of things, right? Chiquita in Guatemala, Operation Produce in Indonesia, or the US forces in Iraq banning reusing seeds of protected varieties. So what we're getting at here is that we started off with the initial model that almost everybody starts off with. And we ended up offering strategies and by which smallholders can push back against agribusiness. That's not typically in some of the ecology journals, right? And so this gets at to the question of how this kind of science can help people. I mean, this is this end of things, right? But of course, it goes the other direction as well, right? Like we should all be taking notes from people who've done agroecology for thousands of years. Like shut the fuck up and take notes and listen and learn. Like most of that is going to be coming up from the global South. It's not that we in the global North have nothing to add, but let's speak to people like we're comrades. So what does this mean in terms of, okay, you gave multiple examples, and to finish off with the last question here, what does this mean in terms of what can I do can I be a Marxist epidemiologist? How can I do this? I will say that the professional costs of engaging in this work are pretty bad, okay? I'm not gonna lie to you, okay? You know, the filtering process happens at multiple levels, and you know, and it's not even that people necessarily would find fault with the specifics of the modeling or the analysis or anything like that. It has nothing to do with the mechanics of science. And it goes back to the science being a source of labor discipline and inordinate amount of pressure put on making sure certain questions are not addressed. So I managed to pay my bills. It's not always easy. I've been able to work in a variety of groups on helping, particularly community groups who need scientific support, particularly at a time when a lot of land-grant universities in the Midwest, where I'm at, have basically abandoned their charters. And as I said earlier, have become agribusiness R&D. That opens up all sorts of ways and means by which you can work with farmers in terms of helping them and their needs. You know, I don't bandy about in the language that I've talked about here today, but you'll be surprised at the extent to which people arrive at radical understanding by virtue of the terrible situations that they find themselves in, right? I find my work in the Midwest part and parcel of attempt to roll back fascism and also prevent a civil war. And the means by which there are all sorts of contradictions that we talked about earlier about that kind of work. But it's absolutely important to be able to learn and talk to and accept and understand and appreciate expertise that extends outside academia or state agencies or wherever you may end up working. So this is my suggestion is continue your studies within the machine. Learn what you can as best as possible. Incredible work is being done in those places. Lots of resources are directed toward supporting bright minds doing excellent work. But in the meantime, you do have an obligation to unplug out of the presumptions of a system aimed at the mass death that we started our conversation with. And so that ends up dealing with the various masks one wears beyond one on your face today in the course of your professional work. But why the fuck do they need to know who you are? You know, that you have other objectives. You have other people that you are obligated or other constituencies. And so that work can be done after the work that you do. And that's difficult because, of course, as you very well know, whether at universities or state agencies are very much, these are knowledge factories and graduate students and postdocs are work to death. I mean, literally death. I mean, so this is as much of a factory as anywhere, you know, producing iPhones or anything. So one must protect yourself to make sure that you are, yes, learning things, but to the point that you can be able to apply this work to the liberation of your constituencies. That's one thing. Second thing is to get the fuck off campus, out of the office, and go talk to somebody who's not part of any of this. And learn to listen to people and understand that they have their expertise as well. And whatever wonderful work we've been able to do in the Midwest because the farmers were in on it from the start. We did not parachute in and say, you got to do this, give me my data, I'm going to scrape some data off. And I got like, my quarterly reports due at the back of the funding agency. That was not how it was done. It was many years conversation. It could be many months, but there's effort necessary to understand that people are brilliant everywhere in all sorts of different fields and to take notes and understanding. I don't know shit about farming, so I knew to shut the fuck up, right? So, and so you learn these things, and in the course, the magical moments happen when the synergy of expertise comes together to bring about beautiful, wonderful things that are, in essence, a science for the people, truly. And I'll stop there for now.
Many thanks, Rob. I certainly would like to applaud you, if that's okay with everyone. Well then, I hope there are questions, and many of them. And if we can't have the time to answer all of them, this conversation does not need to end here. It should continue, and for the rest of our lives even. It'd be great to remain in contact as well. So in any case, let's see.
Thank you. Do you have some anecdotes on how it has gone with some farmers that have been convinced about the kind of compromised factor that they play, as you had in the charts?
Stories of farmers who understand their compromised position, is that it? Yeah, well, I mean, I was cued in even before I started working with them. And there was an amazing short documentary by a British farmer who came to visit farmers who were growing crops for Monsanto. And the farmers know exactly what has gone down here, that they were basically maneuvered into a contract farming in which they didn't have any negotiation power, the entirety of their revenue. I mean, you have a bunch of millionaires walking around with no money. All the consolidation they did to survive, but at the same time, all their revenue goes to these inputs that they're forced into by a conglomerate that isn't just the source of input, but also the end buyer. Some fucked up shit there. That is so wrong. So this is this is one of the contradictions that we talked about earlier, because you have on the one hand, 98% of the farmland is owned by white people in this country, and clearly comes out of, and I'm not about race, but it's about the colonial empire that comes out of this, genocide and land grabbing, all that stuff. So there's the horror of that accumulated damage upon which the mountain of skulls that our farmers stand on, right? And at the same time, they are very much used and abused by an agribusiness system intent on ruining the rural landscape. I mean, something like half of Iowa's rivers are unswimmable. I mean, you look at the watersheds, and there's some guy in Iowa did a study that showed that some of the watersheds, like 3 watersheds that have 320,000 people live across them, had the solid, it had the sewage from all the livestock, the equivalent of the combination of Tokyo, Chicago, and Mexico City combined. So this is excruciating damage. And I think this for me is an endpoint by which urban and rural need to speak to each other and organize together, and to move into an era to find the genius of Martin Luther King, who was able to make people in cities care about what was going on in rural Alabama. So to find that space where someone walking down Philadelphia knows what the fuck is going on in rural Nebraska, and vice versa. And it does go vice versa. The Minnesota Farmers Union put out a statement upon the murder of George Floyd. It's an amazing statement that talked about the racial damage, not only in everyday life, but also within agriculture and farming and food production. They were excellent on that. In other words, they were very much farther ahead than many of the I'm just being mean now, but you know what I'm getting at. Like there's an understanding out there. Don't get me wrong, there's a lot of awful shit too. So, but it's a contested space, and it's a space in which many farmers are in essence assimilated. There's an aspect of a kind of Stockholm syndrome, a kind of traumatic bonding with the very source of the damage of your. So a lot of farmers embrace the capitalist agriculture, even as it destroys their health, their community, their way of life. All that farmland being eaten up by suburban development, not just consolidation, not just environmental destruction. So, and at the same time, they're put on a pedestal as being a means of basically feeding the world, when the world's perfectly capable of feeding itself. So it's a mind fuck for the farmers. That's what they're working on them for. So you're right. Farmers are already entrapped by this conflict in what they do. Because on the one hand, they're engaged in what's called a natural economy, growing food out of the ground, right? And at the same time, they're expected to engage in an industrial economy, meaning, grow food like it's making widgets, and you're on a time scale, you're on a clock that is as if you're working in a factory. And so you're already damaging these farmers right from the start, in addition to all the other things going on in terms of what they've done to farmers' health and well-being in their communities. Does that speak to your question? Okay. Sure.
Hi.
Hi.
Did you hear that? That's what they were saying. I was wondering, I'm gonna like word vomit now, but I know you didn't really want to talk about COVID, but I feel as if how people are perceiving science now, there's almost a deterioration of trust in it. So how do we kind of balance that while also pursuing like an alternative type of science? While simultaneously not creating that like hierarchy of expert versus a quote unquote non-expert?
That's a great question. And it gets at, one of the things we did in this last model here is you're not just fighting agribusiness, but you're also fighting the virus. So how do you do a public health in the scheme in which those in power are the ones that helping push through the virus itself? Like we're not friends with COVID, okay, or SARS-2. We want to put SARS-2 down, but we're have to also fight not only the virus, but the system that in essence is allowing it to circulate. And now you're getting at the difficulties that that these are multiple wheels within wheels and multiple things you have to do at once at a time in which, in the States at least, the left is on its heels a bit. So this is a difficult moment, but also maybe the most important one, because at a time in which we were on our heels, there are people in this room who stood up and laid the foundations for a time and a place in which all the things that we wish in terms of fighting for a true public health, a science for the people, were realized. And it's a difficult spot, right? So it is the hard thing of balancing a variety of political objectives, while also recognizing the humanity of variety of people involved, and the patience necessary to work through and talk to people who don't necessarily agree with us. Learn the skills necessary to make choices about when to intervene and how. So these are our difficult but necessary steps to go through to get to the point to do all the juggling necessary. I think the example that comes to mind right now is the People's CDC. I think for me, it's the first time is that I really felt it was an exercise in the practice of parallel governance. We're not CDC. We don't have $12 billion budget, 1,000 employees, but we managed to meet every week and work through projects necessary to try to fill in at least a little bit for the gaps of what has been the political class's abandonment of the American people. And I have learned so much in the course of doing that work to think through when we engage, when should things turn in a direction in which another way of engaging public health comes to the fore. We will have had the practice and understanding to do that kind of work. I mean, you can have the People's Republic of Brooklyn tomorrow and not to have the people necessary to engage in the governance of this type. So practicing and learning how to organize, how to work in an organization, how to maneuver through conflicts and contrasts, how to operate as part of a group. So I'd say the first step is join a group, like participate in that. Like it's not enough to read blogs at home or post, or I'm dating myself, but posting memes, it's like, I love memes too, don't get me wrong. But like in addition, what is my work in life moving in a direction to deal with what is a historical moment that requires me to stand on my feet and participate. Look, I have a 15-year-old and he's got a 17-year-old, and our kids know what the deal is. And they understand the stakes at hand, and it requires us to step up and speak out in a way that is necessary to push back against the forces perfectly happy to allow capitalism to continue, even means the destruction of the earth. So that moment has arrived. That is, and it sucks because I did not want my kid to have to take that on, right? But people around the world have had to deal with this all along, right? So there's that perspective as well. And listening and learning from the global South, I think, is absolutely critical. You know, I'll leave it at that. I'm not sure how much I got to your question, but it's a good question.
Mhm.
We have one question from the Zoom
Mm.
that I'll read out loud.
Sure.
Rob, can you speak to you've touched on this at different points so far, but can you speak to the march of fascism and anti-science positions?
Oh,
And are there any historic predecessors to the anti-vax kind of skeptic, COVID skeptic perspective?
yeah. I mean, it's a great question. I think you did bring that up as well. There are all sorts of positionalities on science, right? You have, just like there are all sorts of positions on the environment, right? You have your eco-socialists, but you also have your eco-fascists, okay? You have your scientists who are very much in the realm of Levins and Lewontin, the dialectical biologists, hooray. But you also have scientists up and down that line. I got into shouting matches with J. Philip Rushton and you know, the eugenicists from University of Ontario. These are awful, hideous people. They're out there, and they have degrees and professorships and all this stuff. So science, as we're getting at, is it's a methodology, but it can be used as a tool by any political position. So that's one point. The second point is, I do not spend my time shitting on people who are anti-vax. You know why? Because, as was described by a colleague, that was a failure of the government to that's a failure of access to vaccines. That was necessary to spend the time and effort over many months to prepare and convince the American people to be vaccinated. Previously, that went very well. I'm not a proponent of the 1950s, but coming out of the polio, everybody fucking lined up and got their shot. And this was a live vaccine in which many people, not many, but people that got polio from the vaccine. But it speaks to a moment in which the public trust comes in, but you can't have that trust unless you also deliver people on their everyday needs. And I think the classic example that I always think of, I think this is this graph that shows the counties, American counties, US counties, the percent of their populations that went from voting Obama 2012 to Trump 2016. I don't want to get into discussion about how they're the same. Okay, I understand, socialist, but that's a change. But then on the other axis are the diseases of despair. So these are, you know, too much drinking, opioid, too much eating shitty food, all that stuff. And it's a straight line. And largely Midwest and Southern states are on that top part that had the worst in the disease, diseases of despair under Obama, and then the subsequent backlash that came voting for Trump. And if you want, if we don't want, so again, let's get back to in the business of you know, reaching out and finding relationships with people in places of the country that we think would despise us, and to learn to talk to people to try to build the bridges necessary so that those counties don't fall in that direction. But it comes out of the damage and the refusal, a neoliberal program to basically destroy the last of independent agriculture in the rural parts, but also, you know, even under Obamacare's 24 million Americans still didn't have any health insurance. This all, this is all village. You know, these are cardboard villages that the neoliberal political class are presenting as if that these are interventions, and they're not. And it tends to, you know, without the leadership, then anybody comes with the, is more likely that the more fascistic approaches are going to be adopted, in part because they promise the relief of beating down on people below them, instead of what we all want, which is in this room anyway, is to basically punch up the people who are actually causing the damage in the first place. So I think that understanding that context is important, because I do not celebrate the deaths of anti-vax people from COVID. I know it's a liberal thing. They love that shit, and I despise them for it, because you have spat on people who have been denied much, in fact, destroyed. The only ones I do celebrate are the right-wing radio folk. There's a whole bunch of them that died from COVID. Fuck them. They can die. I don't normally celebrate that way, but this one I'll make exception, because when they got on air and they convinced hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people not to do anything about it. So they were actively acting against any effort, but that effort wasn't forthcoming from either Trump or Biden. So Biden says, take your vaccine, and has no program to get people stuck, other than, hey, Jack, if you don't do it, it's your fault. And that speaks volumes. And it really, at the same time, even as on our heels we are, it does speak to the potential to be able to speak to people about their daily needs and woes as a way. But it requires organization, it requires infrastructure. And this is what we're going to be doing for the rest of the time here, that we're going to practice building infrastructure. And I'll leave it at that.
Well, thank you so much. I think this is probably a good point to start closing this part of the discussion. Salvatore, I don't know if you have any questions that you would like, or any comments that you would like to offer up now.
I would, but I fear raising them because it could take many more hours to engage with. But what I would
Raise them, and
Okay.
if we have to schedule a part 2, we'll do that.
precisely. Well, that's one of the things that I do want to emphasize here, is that let not this be the end of the discussion at all, and let this be the start in continuity with what so much has already been done in the past. Even finding out about what's been going on in the past, it might be something that I think is worthwhile for all of us. But again, just to reiterate, the objectives of the seminar series is not just come and discuss stuff and that's it. But if it would be great if any of you could spread the word among people who are practicing epidemiologists, practicing in the public health sector. Find allies within if you are in that field or in those fields. Recruit for socialist formations, be engaged directly as someone producing scientific knowledge, as for example Rob has. So become a socialist epidemiologist if you could, or a public health scientist. Organize events like this one, and keep in touch. So in other words, there needs to be a network as big as possible to be built, also for mutual support, because as Rob was saying before, you will find yourself as if you were alone doing this, but you're not, and we should not allow that to happen if we can. The issues that I wanted to raise, well, I'll just raise one salient one that perhaps will be worthwhile for future discussions as well, would be what has been accomplished through socialist states with respect to the pandemic, and also previous epidemics. How have they been handled? What successes have occurred? What setbacks have been experienced? And try to understand and learn from those historical experiences, but also in the present. In Cuba, you don't have anywhere near as many deaths as here. There is obviously a reason for it, and the fact that they came up with 5 vaccines under extreme pressure for 60 more years of the blockade. So we are not alone in the world, that's for sure. And so that we might want to also draw from the experiences in existing socialist states and all their accomplishments. That's something that perhaps would be worthwhile to look into together. Otherwise, I can't thank you enough for coming and for participating in this. And I hope the conversation will continue for as long as it can. Thank you. And thanks very much to the People's Forum again for hosting us and for the ideas they've also contributed to this seminar series. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rob and Salvatore. This was a fantastic discussion. Just to start, like Salvatore has said, and like Rob has called us to do, we need to start struggling to build our proposals, but we need to do it together. So join an organization if you haven't done it already. And we're going to start closing off the live stream, but maybe before we do that, my proposal is maybe if you would like to explain the vision for the exercise, we'll take a break and then we'll come back and start working on the exercise for as much time as remains for us. And this way our viewers online can get a sense of the proposal that you have and can maybe try to replicate it in their own communities.
Okay, yeah, makes sense. Okay. So, you know, we thought that we would just do the 4 questions and leave it at that. But my experience in the past couple of years, not only working with farmers and pandemic research for the people and people CDC, is that it's foundational to move from merely talking or listening and to actually practice working together. I know it's ridiculous. It sounds like that. I mean, don't you work every day? But maybe it's under the boss man, right? We're going to work in a different way. We're going to do along the lines of our own objectives. We're going to practice this. We're going to practice the science for the people. And what we have here over the room are these 4 different signs across the room. Neighborhood brigade during a pandemic. There's a mobile VPN. There's a fabric shed in downstate New York. And the 4th one is, what is that over there? Can you
Underground medical clinic.
Medical clinic. All these, in essence, require some participation of a biophysical scientist. But at the same time, they're foundationally related to community needs. So why did I choose these 4 things? I have some expertise in some of them, and other things I thought was just kind of cool. I want to learn some more, right? So I think the fabric shed has gotten my attention. So what we're going to do is you get to go to whatever one that you find of interest. And you're like, whoa, what if there's only 2 over there and 10 over here? So what? That's how it works. It's the interest of the people involved is critical here. And so will you be able to do as much as for 2 for 10? Well, maybe. Depends. The difficulty of getting 10 people is like, sometimes it's herding cats, you know? So there's the cognition, the institutional cognition necessary to get people to work together, to work through, how do we work together? You're not going to figure it out tonight. It takes many months to work out how people work together. But we want to practice how to do that so that in the course of the years ahead, you know that this is part and parcel of how to bring about a society in which public health is respected and people's needs are taken care of. Okay? So, how to set up an underground medical clinic, right? So this came up, I think, in the early days of Trump 1, which will hopefully be the only one. But there was a worry about, you know, almost paranoid notions of, you know, what the fascist reaction would be. A couple broken windows in the Capitol, but, you know, there was earlier true worries. But, you know, doctors, nurses, medical technicians, do you need security for that? How do you supply such an underground medical clinic? What exactly is such a thing, right? In other words, it's not at the hospital, right? Somewhere else. Why would you need such a thing? Something to talk about, to think through. Maybe we don't, you know, we want to, the hospitals, you know, the young lords try to make sure their hospitals work for the community. It's one way of doing it. There's maybe another way, I don't know. How to run a neighborhood brigade that checks on people as they shelter in place during an outbreak, right? Those logistics and problems, right? You know how the government was supposed to hire hundreds of thousands of community health workers, they didn't do that? Well, perhaps it's more of a mutual aid thing of people having to check on their neighbors, but in a way that is a little bit more formalized than merely, hey, how you doing, Mary? But on the other hand, you don't want to be in the business of spreading the very virus you're trying to check people on. So what does those logistics look like? How does scheduling work and all that kind of stuff? How does that work? How to set up a mobile VPN, virtual
Private network.
I
Yeah, I
forgot
always forget
myself.
the P.
So, computer heads and mechanics, what use of such a thing would there be? I know there was some discussion of avoiding, surveillance. I don't know. What use could that be? And then how to set up a fabric shed from anywhere from Hudson Valley to Long Island back into New York. So it requires farmers, economists, manufacturers, people in fashion, this kind of stuff. So there's a variety of possibilities for people to participate. You don't have to be a person who is a natural scientist or starting to be one. Expertise is needed everywhere. And some of you who aren't scientists who may be here can provide things that the scientists have no fucking clue about. So that's why we're going to learn to talk to each other and develop language to speak across expertise and practice the notion of working as a group. So I'll give you about 30 minutes. You pick one of the four. Each group will choose a moderator for discussion and a note recorder. Then you're going to walk through a first cut thinking about problematics and logistics for about 30 minutes. And I'm not sure you're going to solve anything. That's okay. We're here, but you're going to learn to have some good conversation. But don't let perfectionism get in the way of this. That's not how this shit works. It's about feeling out and working through and practicing. Then we'll have a last 10 minutes. The note recorder from each group is going to report back to the full group about what you learned. So this is the thing. You break out, come back, share with each other so that we can learn from each other. But that's what we're going to do. Okay.
Cool. Thank you so much. So we'll take like a 5-minute, you want to stretch, get something to eat, drink, and come back. And then you can just go to the group that you prefer.
Yes.
And
So